It's time for Real Talk with Cindy Barber. Stay tuned for conversation and information from her special guest. Now sit back and relax and enjoy Real Talk with Cindy Barber. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Real Talk with Cindy. Please let me know the city, state, or country where you are joining me from. Good evening. I see my sister is on. East Hartford, Connecticut, welcome. And welcome, Yolanda. Thank you so much. And those that are watching from YouTube, I welcome you on tonight. We have a very good discussion, so stay tuned. Please tag and share and let others know that we are on. Please tag and share and let everyone know that we're on right now on tonight. My guests are here. Good evening, Pastor Miko from Charlotte, North Carolina. God bless you. Please tag someone. You can tag 5 people, 6 people, 10 people to let them know that we're here on the Cindy Barber Ministries page, as well as my YouTube channel, which is Real Talk TV with Cindy Barber. Please tag and share and let others know that we're on. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is Real Talk TV with Cindy Barber. If you would like to be a blessing to Real Talk, please use my Cash App. Is at the bottom of the screen, $ Cindy's Keys. Also, if you're interested and you have an announcement or advertisement or a flyer that you'd like to advertise here on Real Talk, you can send me an email at miss.cindybarber@gmail.com or feel free to inbox me. If you have admin or tech skills and would like to work with Real Talk, please inbox me. Or send me an email, ms.cindybarber@gmail. I'm so glad to have you all on tonight. Please tag and share. Please tag and share. And let others know that we're here. Those that are watching on my YouTube channel, thank you for being here on tonight. It's good to see you. I see you coming on. Please tag and share and let others know that we are here. We are here. And we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. And we are here on tonight. God bless you. God bless you. I see you coming on. Bless you, Sheena McMillan from Massachusetts, Springfield, Massachusetts. God bless you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Well, I'm going to not prolong it any longer. I'm going to bring on my guest, my first guest, and this is Pastor Reverend Dr. Wayne Weathers. God bless you, Pastor. How are you today?
God bless you. Doing great. God bless you. Thank you. It's an honor to be on your show today.
And I'm so honored to have you with me. So share with everyone and let us know, the others know, who you are, your church, your ministry, and what you're doing.
Wow, thank you. My name is Reverend Dr. Wayne and Weathers. I'm the organizer and pastor of Vision of Hope Baptist Church. We're located 908 West Avenue, Jenkintown, PA 19046. Our
Mm-hmm.
ministry has been in existence for 7 years. With,
Wow.
in addition to pastoring, serve in various capacities, radio show
Mm-hmm.
host of Conversation Unplugged, which broadcasts on WWDB 860 AM in Philadelphia, as well as
Mm-hmm.
www.spiritualconnectradio.com. I am a community activist involved with Black clergy in Philadelphia and vicinity, moderator to Pennsylvania Eastern Keystone Baptist Association.
Wow.
Wow. Second vice president of Black clergy in Philadelphia and vicinity, also the political action chair of the Baptist Pastors Ministers Conference of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Baptist State Convention, and Political Affairs Committee chairperson
Mm-hmm.
of Black clergy in Philadelphia and vicinity. So it's just a lot of hats with different heads.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You are really, really busy. And
Yes.
I'm so glad you were available to be on Real Talk One tonight.
Thank
God bless you so much. And I'm going to bring on my next guest, Pastor Damian Stewart. How are you today?
I am good. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for having me on to be a part. I am honored. I am honored to be a part. Honored to be a part.
And I'm honored to have you with me on tonight. So share a little bit about Pastor Stewart and about your ministry as well.
So I am the pastor, senior pastor, of Rock Kingdom Worship Center, and recently the ministry that I birthed, Kingdom Worship Center Church, merged with my home church, which is Rock of Ages Worship Ministries, or Rock of Ages Holy Church, better known as, with Pastor Darrell Parham was the pastor. And recently we merged churches, and now I am the senior pastor of Rock Kingdom Worship Center, and Pastor Parham is senior pastor emeritus. And that happened toward the end of last year. So we are just, in full steam ahead. We've done major renovations on the building. We are now about to open up to the community. With COVID, things have kind of been shut down. And as soon as we started to open back up, here we go with another variant. So we're getting geared up for our grand opening or reopening in March. And, just looking forward to what God is about to do.
Wow. That's amazing. And to merge two churches together, that's phenomenal.
It doesn't happen often, but we thank God that we were able to do it. We thank God we were able to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
It's truly been a blessing.
Yes. Wow. Well, thank you so much. And I'll get back to you. Now we have Pastor Wayne Griffith. How are you, Pastor?
I'm doing very well, Sister Cindy. It's a pleasure and a joy to be on your show, and thank you for the gracious invitation to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you because I know you're another one that wear many hats. So share a little bit about what you're doing and what you have done and what you're doing now.
Sure. I've been in ministry for a little over 40 years. I'm originally from Hamilton Township outside of Trenton, New Jersey. And I started ministry doing prison ministry in Bordentown for a couple of years. And then I was doing some college ministry at the College of New Jersey, where I graduated from. So I did some student ministry there. Then got called to a church in Pennington, New Jersey, small church, good church in Pennington, and served there. It was a suburban church. And then after some years, the Lord blessed, and we started an urban church in the city of Trenton. So it was a one church in two locations, and we basically served the urban population and the suburban population. And now I'm associate minister at Waterfront Church in Washington, D.C. And Zach Reynolds is the pastor. I moved to D.C. about 5 years ago, and I moved basically not to be in leadership, but the Lord opened the door. Pastor Zach asked me to do some ministry there, teaching and preaching, and we're doing that. The Lord is blessing. My background is basically economic development. I'm a former banker and was the president of the Concerned Pastors of Trenton Economic Development Corporation, a collaboration of 50 churches. And we did some housing development, built some townhouses for those who are on Section 8, moved them to their own homes, and did some social type work there. So the Lord is blessed, and we're enjoying what we're doing. God opens doors. We try to step through. So it's just a pleasure being with you tonight here on your broadcast.
It's a pleasure to have you. You're on a tour now, correct?
That is correct. So one of the things I started when I moved to Washington, D.C., was to start a tour business. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing tours, historical tours. I always loved history. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing tours of all of Washington, D.C. We do Mount Vernon, Washington's Plantation. We also
Mm-hmm.
do the the Georgetown. Of course, we do Jamestown, Yorktown,
Mm-hmm.
Williamsburg. I'm going to Gettysburg tomorrow, and we
Mm-hmm.
do Philadelphia, Trenton battle
Okay.
site, Princeton battle site. So I'm pretty busy doing tours also. So it's a way
Right.
of also doing ministry because part of that is called Christian Discoveries, where
Mm-hmm.
we work with Christian schools and we
Right.
basically teach them the historical and Christian significance of the area.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been doing that for about
Wow.
5 years.
Wow. That's amazing. That's awesome. And it's very much needed. Very much needed. That's great.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes. I'm going to bring all our pastors back. And tonight we're going to begin our discussion. As you see, everyone, they have a lot on their plate. They're well versed with this subject that we're going to share and talk about on tonight. And this is just part one. And I'm going to be able to bring them back again with some other titles that I'm going to have concerning the Black church. So the first question that I have for these pastors are, what role did the church play in the civil rights movement, which began in 1954? I'll start with Pastor Griffith.
Sure. Well, I think it was pivotal. The church provided a lot of leadership, and it's good that you mentioned 1954 because the church has always been involved in
Mm-hmm,
social action.
mm-hmm,
This is the 54 is the modern civil rights movement. But if you
mm-hmm,
go back to Frederick Douglass, if you go back to Josiah Henson, there were clergymen that were engaged in empowerment during times before the modern civil rights movement. But of
mm-hmm.
course, with the modern civil rights movement, you had the leadership of Dr. King and Abernathy and some of the clergy what were there. They provided leadership. They were
Mm-hmm,
like this, the spirit of the movement.
mm-hmm.
And so without the church being involved, it really wouldn't have been as successful as it was. Of course, the leadership cast the vision, and thank
Mm-hmm.
God that the people caught the vision with the Montgomery bus boycott, of course, and other movements.
Right.
But the church was pivotal, and the Lord blessed the
Mm-hmm,
church to be in a position to galvanize people and
mm-hmm,
to encourage people to not
mm-hmm.
adjust to injustice. Because what's happening, of course, people had
Right.
adjusted to injustice, and
Mm-hmm.
they had to have a new spirit of saying, we're not going to take this any longer. And it was the
Right.
leadership of the church, the women
Mm-hmm.
that worked behind the scenes many times, the men were out front, and they basically moved it forward. So the church was very pivotal to the civil rights movement.
Right. Right. Pastor Damian.
Well, picking up on where Pastor left off, I'll say that the Southern Christian Leadership Council was established by Dr. King, and 3 years later in 1957. And of course, we understand that they were pretty much, a lot of them were pastors that thought that it
Mm-hmm.
was important to for some of them, especially Dr. King, vacate the pulpit to get
Right.
involved in the political process. Their way
Mm-hmm.
of doing so was to now zoom in on where the hot spots were and actually go there and draw attention to those hot spots. But in addition
Mm-hmm.
to that, they conducted leadership training programs, citizen education projects, and voter registration drives.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe the church was very pivotal in the civil rights movement,
Mm-hmm.
because without just the key person, Dr. King, where would that movement have been? And after he died, what happened to that movement? So
Yeah.
once again, I think the church was very, very pivotal in that, very, very important.
Yes.
Michael.
That's good. Pastor Weathers.
Yes, just to echo my colleagues in ministry, the Black church was very pivotal in the civil rights movement. Definitely
Mm-hmm.
with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Reverend Abernathy, churches coming together in Montgomery, Alabama, to protest when Rosa Parks sat down, and which really launched the civil rights movement into where it is today. The
Yeah.
fact that they organized with the Montgomery Improvement Association, which
Mm-hmm.
led that lengthy boycott, bus
Mm-hmm.
boycott that is, which brought the walls of Jericho down, as we know, as segregation. And even though it came down, still had to fight to get it implemented. When we
Mm-hmm.
also look at the Black church, African American church, I think there's one critical piece that we definitely uh, have to recognize as well. The mere fact that the Black church represents the body of Jesus Christ, but in its inception, when we were founded, or our churches was founded in the midst of the hush harbors during slavery, during the invisible institution,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that the slave master basically would not allow African slaves to worship unless they were supervised. And so they were willing to risk their lives in order to go into hush harbors to have worship. So the Black church not only symbolizes the body of Jesus Christ, but it also symbolizes I guess you say, we symbolize that what we stand against when it comes to injustice, racism,
Right.
and injustice. So the prophetic role of the Black church that was carried out in its inception in America, we saw it carried out in the civil rights movement as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what, pastors, to you is the role of the churches in the Black community, and how important was the pastor's role? Pastor Griffith?
Well, I think the pastor really set the tenor and the tone of a movement. If you're, especially if you're pastoring a church, you know, your vision,
Mm-hmm.
your personality, your ability to um, use your gifts and abilities as God has given you to provide the leadership of the church is very
Mm-hmm.
important. But the pastor is at the pivotal point of trying to set the stage, you know, for what will take place to empower His people. And
Right.
God basically gives the pastor the vision, and through the
Mm-hmm.
work of the Holy Spirit, and through the work of working together with the leadership of the church, and hopefully the pastor will have leaders around him or her that will
Mm-hmm.
assist. They bring the mission forward. But the
Mm-hmm.
role of the pastor is very important.
Yeah.
What one pastor in a church who could stand up in the midst of violence going on
Mm-hmm.
can quiet the crowd, and could basically be there to say, look, brothers, as Dr. Weather said, what Dr. King did,
Mm-hmm.
where they could have chose violence, but they chose nonviolence. And so King had mentioned on a number of occasions that Jesus gave the motivation, which was love, the love
Mm-hmm.
ethic, and then Gandhi gave the method, which was nonviolent direct action. And
Mm-hmm.
so it takes a wise pastor to realize locally what will meet the needs of that community in order to be prophetic, as Dr. Weather said. And
Mm-hmm.
then as God inspires the church and moves the church forward is very important. The Bible says
Mm-hmm.
without a vision, the people perish. And
Right.
so you need a vision in order
Mm-hmm.
for you to take things forward.
Yes. Pastor Stewart?
Man, this is a so many answers are floating around. So I know I have other people to answer. So I'll just give a few thoughts. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the question is, what is the role of the church in the Black community? So
Yes.
I'll say it is the role of the church to ignite and rekindle hope. It is also
Mm-hmm.
now the role of the church to now be a place where we get people to connect to joy, true joy, which, you know, the old
Mm-hmm.
song says, this joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me, the world can't take it away.
Mm-hmm.
So right through to Andrew Young, I heard him speak, and he said how vital it was for the church to recognize how the role they play in restoring joy to people. Like when people come to church, they come to church with their burdens. They come to church heavy laden. They come to church with all their worries. So
Right.
getting them
Right.
to be able to forget about that and connect to the source,
Mm-hmm.
the source being God, that makes us vital in that. Another answer that I would have would be to provide a place of community. So when we think about the Black community, the church is supposed to provide a place of community, a place of interconnection, a place
Mm-hmm.
where now the neighborhood can come together now and actually meet, talk to your
Mm-hmm.
neighbors. I think that dynamic has been strained and challenged with the way church is constructed today.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, people attended churches in their neighborhood. So therefore, when you came to church, you saw all the neighbors. And if somebody's kid was acting up, for example, you saw that neighbor at church and you told that parent about their child. Now you have a dynamic where everybody's coming from all over to come to now a church that's not in their community. So it makes it a little harder to now be that voice in the community. At the same time, within that community, we have to be now a place where we can exchange information. That's very important. Exchange information, and of course, spiritual enlightenment. I'll stop there because I don't want to take up all the time. But once again, if you come back to me, I'll answer some more. But I want to hear what Pastor Weathers has to say. But once again,
right.
And I'll stop there.
Pastor Weathers.
If I can just for 30 seconds mess with Pastor Stewart. Pastor Stewart, when I was in the first grade, I hated going to church every Sunday. And the reason why is because my first grade teacher was a member of the church. So PTA every quarter. It didn't happen every quarter. It happened every Sunday when I went to church. So I hated going to church when I was in the first grade. To answer the question, what is the role of the Black church in the Black community? Cliff Note version, just a quick story. Early 2000, the first church I pastored was in Durham, North Carolina, fresh out of seminary, Duke University Divinity School. There was a gentleman that came into the church. It was a Wednesday night, right as Bible study was getting ready to end. The deacon was his teacher, I think either in grade school. So to make a long story short, after he sang and got a Bible and everything like that, he hit some hard times in his life. He and I was around the same age. The deacon said to him, what made you decide to come to the church? And here's the story. It's a Wednesday night. He said, me and my boys was a few blocks down on the corner getting ready to rob a drugstore. It's a true story. He said, we had the guns laid out and we had our plan and we was getting ready to orchestrate. He didn't say orchestrate. He said, we had our plan and we would get ready to put in place. But here's why I tell the story. He says, but when I saw the light on in the church, he says, I looked up. He says, and I knew I had to go in another direction. And I wanted to segue that to say that the role of the Black church in the Black community is to, one, be the beacon of light to our brothers and sisters, but also to show our brothers and sisters that may be traveling in a direction that's not right in the eyesight of God, that there's an opportunity for them going to another direction. Third, the Black church has to be the prophetic voice that will cry out against the injustices that are taking place in the communities as well. That we focus on salvation, which is critical. We focus on baptizing, but we can't just stop there. We have to also include the social justice issues that are needed to help liberate our brothers and sisters, which ties to the role of the pastor. The role of the pastor has a dual responsibility. What someone said at the Hampton Ministers Conference, I think 2006, that we have a priestly responsibility, which takes care of the spiritual needs of the church. And then we have a prophetic responsibility to be that prophetic voice that will be able to tell the pharaohs, and you know what I mean, and the Ahabs and the Jezebels that you have to let our people go.
Right. Yeah. Pastor Stewart, you want to add something? I think you.
I think as the Black church, we have to move. If we're going to talk about us in the community, we have to move to a place where we usher people to growth. This is what we do. We usher people to growth by way of personal relationship, evolving relationship. That's like a key role for us in the community. We, once again, allowing people to understand that it's all about a relationship with God. Now, not through your pastor, but you. God wants to share with you. To coach people to seek and know and understand their individual purpose in God. Because if they can tap into their individual purpose, they can tap into true joy, happiness, and also tap into now, even from a career perspective. If your career is lined up with your purpose, how happy are you getting up going to work versus being miserable? So when you think about the church and the Black community, we have to really consider that we have to get people to connect to God, as now already said by Pastor Weathers, and also to purpose. We can't get them to connect with purpose. We're really just not doing our job. Now, of course, the pastor is the under shepherd. So it's the job of the pastor to spend time with God and to tell the community, the church, what God is saying. The shepherd is to now guide people to pasture in whatever season that is. And that's like a pastor has to be really sensitive to what's going on in the world and in that local community, so you can now let people know where you think God is telling you where the pastor should be. Like, for example, right now, it's a lot going on in the world. I told my church Sunday, this is the time, if you got lax in having everything piled up, your waters, your essentials, looking at what's going on in the world, this is the time to do that. The church should be that voice, as Pastor Withers said. I want to read something. Dr. King said this: the church must be reminded that it is not the master of the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be its guide and the critic of the state. I want to get to this point. He says the church must recapture its prophetic zeal. It will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority if we don't now keep our prophetic zeal. If we don't now say what thus saith the Lord. So that's our job in the community. This is what God is saying now. This is what God said then. And I'll pause there. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Has the Black church lost its credibility as the voice of the community? I'll start with Dr. Weathers. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. Have we lost our credibility? I would say it depends on the church in its entirety, because I think one of the dangers is we take the actions of one church and lump it into these are all churches. You know what I mean? So I would say maybe a minority have, to a certain degree, lost its credibility for various reasons. I think one of the dangers that's happening now is numbers determine how relevant you are, which means which is not true, which means that if you have over a certain amount, then you're relevant. If you don't have over a certain amount, then you're not. It ties into what my band director, being at Virginia State University, being in the HBCU marching band, I remember when our band was rebuilding and we would go up against bands that was maybe twice our size, and we would get nervous. And I never forget Mr. Harold Houghton, a great band director. He would say, never get nervous about the amount of people that's on the field. He said, because just because they got large numbers doesn't mean everybody's playing the instruments. You got me. And so to go back to the credibility issue, I think what causes the credibility of the church to be questioned, one, let's hit the hammer on top of the nail. We have an anti-church movement within media right now to give an image that, churches are irrelevant, especially the Black church. And that also goes way back to slavery as well. Then two, somehow along the line, some, or maybe a few African-American churches got, how can you say, more comfortable with being homogeneous, meaning that they like those who are within the congregation with whom they've grown up with, right? But yet are not embracing those who are not part of that homogeneous environment, because, we started out in Sunday school, we've grown up as adults, a new community come in, but they don't fit the mold like us. You got me? And then also the credibility, because there's so much I can say, I want to limit it. The credibility of the church is always questioned when we disengage with the community, when we become isolated, where our ministries is just in the church, but yet we don't engage outside of the church. Then the credibility of the church is questioned, and the churches that are in turmoil as well, or one or two pastors that may have committed an act of discretion that goes against the will of God. One or two of those become now the model of the Black church, which is not right as well. So to a certain degree, maybe a minority of the credibility of the church can be questioned, but as long as Jesus Christ is involved, you can never diminish the credibility of the church.
Wow, that's good. Pastor Griffith?
Yeah, I agree absolutely with Dr. Weathers. Overall, you can never diminish the credibility of the church. There may be individual cases where your credibility is lacking and things happen that will cause the church to have a black eye. Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So the church will be successful if it keeps Christ at the epicenter of it. So, and you cannot dump all of the churches into one basket, but some churches are just doing some wonderful things. The media may not put a shining light on that, but overall, God's church and very faithful pastors and ministers are doing wonderful work. But there is a anti-church spirit going on, and overall, not just the black church. I mean, there are white European churches that lost a lot of credibility. The church in general has lost a lot of credibility.
Yeah.
But you cannot just focus on what's bad because there's some wonderful things going on within the church.
In the church,
The
yeah.
Lord is blessing, and you have to focus on what is good. So that's basically the feeling that I have as relates to the credibility of the church. God's church
Yes.
will be there. The light will be there. God will make sure that people are saved. God will make sure that the mission is accomplished. And even though there may be sad stories and bad stories, overall, God's mission will be accomplished.
Amen. Pastor Stewart?
I think we got to look at this from two different perspectives, as what Pastor Griffiths, pointed out, and also Pastor Weathers. You have the church at large, and you have now the individual churches. So I think the church at large has lost credibility. Absolutely, I would say at large we have lost credibility in a major way. In a major way, I think the community doesn't see the church as a contributor or as an investor or a help. It sees us as hypocrites, holier than thou people who just don't live by what they preach, and they see us as takers from the community that never reinvest. Now, much of this has changed. Just their opinion of us. They don't even want us in their community, and sometimes, because once again, they see us as part of the problem. I think that we must get to the place where we practice doing as we're growing versus practicing working towards growth with the aim of doing. I think that pastors start out with a whole lot of plans, and some people say, once we grow, we're going to do this, or once we do this, we're going to do this. But I think we got to get to the place while we're doing as we're growing, because that's when you get credibility with the community. When they see you investing your time, when they see you walking the streets, somebody gets killed, they see you now coming out now to comfort that family. All these things gives us credibility. Is the church only open on Sundays? Can the community come to the church now if they have a problem? And one of my key things is that the church is so busy looking for government programs in order to do what it does, that it doesn't really understand. We are supposed to be self-sustaining. So therefore, if we're supposed to minister to the whole individual, if there's a hungry individual in the community, that individual should be able to come to the church and say, could you please help me in some type of way? So I think the church has lost its credibility from the part of being a part of the community and from the part of living according to the word.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that or say anything? Pastor Weathers?
Yeah, just to add to, not to take away from what Pastor Stewart said, when you talk about the credibility of the church, what has been lost, I think an added piece of credibility, the added piece of losing credibility is when you want to sit at the table with the king and satisfied with the crumbs from the king, and selling out your soul, your ministry, and your identity to the king, and yet not coming back to the community with resources to help do ministry. Not that you need it from the king. Let me explain that a little bit further.
Yeah.
From the activism stages and everything, I see some, not a lot, but I see some that will really sell out themselves just to be with certain ones at the table. You got me? And as long as they're the ones sitting at the table, let's call it for what it is. As long as they're the ones sitting at the table and isolate everybody else, then the credibility is lost. Or you're more concerned with sitting with the higher echelons and then looking down upon the people with whom you're supposed to minister to. It takes the credibility. So there could be layers and layers that could be added on, but to a certain degree, that is the cancer that metastasizes within the community, where the credibility of the pastor and the church is lost.
Wow. Yes.
And Sister Cindy, Pastor Weather is exactly correct, because what happens when that individual who has to be the HNIC with the government,
Mm-hmm.
and they sell their soul, then they can be easily eliminated. And then,
Mm-hmm.
since they're the only ones who sort of had the voice to
Mm-hmm.
those in power, when you
Mm-hmm.
eliminate that individual, then you lose the continuity of people working together. And one of the saddest things is that many times local black pastors do not work together.
Yeah.
We may work and do some good local things, but then when
Mm-hmm.
you talk about some regional things and some national things, then many times is lacking because of the who's going to be the one who has the ear of, like
Mm-hmm.
I say, the master. And
Yeah.
it's just so unfortunate that happens many times. And
Wow.
and that's one of the tragic things about many times churches and black churches in some certain communities.
Mm-hmm. Pastor Damian, I think you wanted to say something.
I'll say this quote by Dr. King. There was a time when the church was very powerful. It was during that period that the early Christians rejoiced, but they were
Mm-hmm.
deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a
Mm-hmm.
thermostat that transformed the mores of society. And when you think about that, the church is supposed to be an agent of transformation,
Mm-hmm.
guiding culture, helping to transform culture so we don't conform, but we are now
Mm-hmm.
transformed by the renewing of our minds.
Mm-hmm.
So, from that perspective, as what my two colleagues have already said, unfortunately, people get lost in
Yeah.
their way, and
Mm-hmm.
other things become the most important thing, and you forget why you're there. You're there to
Yeah.
transform. You're there to
Right.
guide. You're not
Mm-hmm.
there to take cues from the government. You're not there to
Mm-hmm.
rub elbows with them so you can get what you want. You are there to tell
Yeah.
them what thus saith the Lord. You're there to be
Mm-hmm.
that
Right.
prophetic voice. And funny thing today is we have a lot of people calling themselves prophet. But however, back in biblical days, if you had the office of a prophet, you challenged government. You weren't talking about cars and houses. You were called to
Mm-hmm.
now say, "Thus saith the Lord" to the mass of people. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
we have kind of lost. We've kind of lost that, and we've kind of diluted the office of the
Mm-hmm.
prophet. Because what I'm wondering is, where are some of the prophets of today that are challenging the
Right.
government, that are not trying to be their friend, but saying, "Thus saith the Lord."
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
Wow.
Mr. Cindy, can I just
Yes.
can I mess
Mm-hmm.
with Pastor Stewart? I would say they are prophets. They are.
I agree. I agree.
And no. But here's the deal. But it's not the PROPHET. They the
Right.
PROFIT. So they are prophets.
Say that.
But
I
Say that
agree.
one more time.
yeah,
Say it
what
again.
type of prophet do? Yeah, what type of prophet are you? Are you the
Right.
Right.
That's
Mm-hmm.
true.
PROPHET or are you the PROFIT?
Right.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
some are more geared towards the PROFIT instead of PROPHET.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
I think people, with this prosperity gospel going around, folks have changed, went from Jesus to jewelry,
Mm-hmm.
and from sacrifice to substance.
Hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it is where the issue, Jesus sacrificed,
Mm-hmm.
and the gospel is, in our Christian life, is about sacrifice. Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me.
Mm-hmm.
And we have many times folks who are not willing to sacrifice because they want to be comfortable
Mm-hmm.
within certain means of substance. And the gospel is getting lost, I think, when you have
Mm-hmm.
the focus on substance and not on
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the problems. One of the problems, I say. I mean, when I
Mm-hmm.
talk to I've been preaching for 42 years,
Mm-hmm.
and when I talk to some of these young preachers, my colleagues may want to agree with me. Some of these young preachers come, and I don't see a sacrificial spirit. Uh, there are some that have it, of course, but
Yeah.
many don't have that. They have a spirit of I'm going to get mine. I want to be James Brown every Sunday morning, and entertain, and many times not teach. And the church suffers because not willing to sacrifice, because they're too much concerned about what they can get and the substance of what they can get.
Wow.
I may not be back on the show again, Cindy. I'm going to say it the way it is.
Right.
That's what I see, and it's so unfortunate. So unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Pastor Griffith, I was going to say other pastor. Well, what strength or weaknesses that you see of the Black church?
Strength. Well, I think the church has traditionally been strong in terms of mentoring programs, of leadership development, for training young men, young women, and of pooling resources together to assist in empowerment of missionary work. I mean, those are some of the things the church has been very successful at, and I think it should be commended for doing that. I mean, as Dr. Stewart was saying earlier, the church had been the epicenter of the Black community, and the spirit of the Black community, and a lot of the things that aided us to be sane in the midst of a world that tried to make us insane. The church has been there to give us self-respect, to give us education, to give us a sense of purpose, as Dr. Stewart said earlier. Very important. That came from the Black church, where the outside community considered us a nobody. The church was there to say you are somebody.
Right.
And through the training, through the teaching, through the motivation, through the mentoring, through the pooling resources together, I think the church has been very strong in that area.
Okay, Pastor Stewart, the strengths and or weaknesses.
I'll mention two strengths first, and I'll say that the church remains the hospital in the community. So you can say a lot about the church, but the doors of the church in the Black community remain open, and it remains to be a place that people that are hurting can come in to be healed.
Right.
People that are hurting can come in and find sanctuary. People that are having identity crises and don't know who they are outside of the church can come into the church to gain a sense of identity. So I think that those are strengths of the church. I think that if I think about weakness of the church, and I know this is dealing with the Black church, but in 2022, the fact that we're saying the Black church is a weakness in itself and not the church. Dr. King once said that, the most segregated place that you're going to find on the planet is on Sunday morning at the time people go to church. With all the word that we have, with all the knowledge that we have not yet picked up on how to properly embrace each other's diversities and become one. Because the church becomes one, these issues we have of racism, they may be their undercurrent, but they're definitely not shining in their faces like we see today since Donald Trump had to become president, right? Because the church would have stood up as one and now condemned it as one. But once again, because of the separation, we have an issue. Now we want to talk about the Black church. I hope my colleagues agree with me. And let me say, before I say this, let me preface this. My wife is going for her doctorate degree in psychology. She's been working in the field for a long time, so I have nothing against the field of psychology. Okay, I think it is a definite need in our community. However, I think the church has lost, after the altar call experience when somebody gets delivered, we missed the fact that they needed to be counseled. They needed to have somebody to sit down and talk to and walk them through how to now grow in their deliverance. And so now we have everybody screaming, about running to a counselor, and a lot of times the church is being ostracized from that process as if we don't have the ability to counsel individuals, to tell them,
Mm-hmm.
to listen to what they're saying, and then give them what thus saith the Lord. And and we're trained for the pastor or for the clergyman, we're trained to listen to you and then listen to God and then give you our opinion. My wife, she's trained to listen to you, and let you come up with your own opinion, right? And so there's a different approach. But I think that we got to get back to that time. We have to now, we have to establish that we are there to talk to people, to counsel people, to be there for people. And I think that's a major weakness of the church that you see now manifesting itself with now everybody telling everybody, really don't go to the church, go to the psychologist. And I'll pause.
Pastor Weathers?
Yeah, there's many strengths of the church, especially the Black church. I'll just list one or two, maybe three at the maximum. I think one, the strength of the church is that we provide guidance or direction how to establish a relationship with Jesus Christ. I think that's very critical at this particular point. Two, I'll speak from my own personal experience before in going into ministry. The church, especially the Black church, provided me hope in the midst of despair. That I, hit some of my most lowest times in my life, that I could at least go into the house of God. Even, at that time I was running from my calling in ministry, didn't want to get close to anybody. But when I sat in that pew and listened to my pastor preach his words, God's word, ministered to me in the time of my most challenging times in my life. Another strength of the Black church is, or the church period, grew up in the Black church, the spiritual disciplines that I was taught to exercise and utilize. Coming out of Shiloh Baptist Church, Edgemere, Maryland, the pastor was Bishop Heber and Brown. Learning about, the disciplines of fasting and praying and worship and studying and things of that nature. Those disciplines were strengths. Not to also talk about the outreach ministry. So just personally, those were strengths. The weakness of the church, especially African American church, is how we went from Christ-centered to culture-centered. Where the domain of the culture now dictates how we govern ourselves when it comes to worship in Jesus Christ. Case in point, for an example, one of my favorite actresses. So this isn't a slight against Whoopi Goldberg. This is the character in the Sister Act. You got me. So when I don't really know the name character, but I just know him as Radio Raheem. So when Radio Raheem was the detective that was hiding Mary McLaren with the nuns and everything, and he goes to the church and sees Whoopi Goldberg character. And he says, basically your identity has been compromised. They're coming to get you, etc. And Whoopi says, her character says in Sister Act 1, why don't you come into the church and see the show? You got me? She says it right then and there. See the show. And now culture now tells us that we're not to have a spirit-led worship. We're to have a cultural reality show disguised as worship. You got me? So now our atmosphere is more reflective of reality culture. We have to have the biggest ministry, the biggest stage. We have to dress in a certain way to fit the costume of reality TV because that's what the culture dictates. And so we have to get back to being spirit-led instead of culture-led, being God pleasers and not people pleasers, And so those are some of the weaknesses. Oh, I need to say this, that our somebodyness is not based on the positions and the titles that we get in church. Our somebodyness is rooted and grounded in Jesus Christ. And one of the weaknesses is that when we come from out in the world and then we get positions in the church, those positions make us into somebody. Then we fight like Hades to try to either isolate people out or to flex our muscles to show that we are somebody. But if we're truly rooted and grounded in Jesus Christ, the position doesn't make you. It's the calling that shapes your identity.
Yes. Wow.
There's many more weaknesses, but I just don't have enough time. I'm Baptist, so you give me 5 minutes, I'll give you 30.
It's okay. It's okay. We have a question here. Pastor Miko asked, has the pandemic caused the Black church to reevaluate how church was? And do you think the Black church is ready to move forward in this new era? Let's start with Pastor Griffith.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has allowed the church to be creative in terms of media ministry. Because since we're not meeting physically, many times we became very creative in reaching people through Facebook, through YouTube, through other mediums. I think that's was very helpful. Um, the church was closed, but the gospel was open up in other areas.
Right.
And so I think that was very important. I know some pastors I've talked to, they have not gone back in their churches yet, and they're saying how the membership has grown even through Facebook and other mediums, and the offerings are up, the membership is growing, and they're kind of reluctant even going back to the physical building as quickly as they thought before. I don't know if my other colleagues have heard other pastors say that, but I think we had to recreate some type of form of worship to another way than physically meeting. Now, we should never lose the fellowship. The Bible does say, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. It's very important that you have the spirit of fellowship and having brothers and sisters to worship together, sleeping together, and so forth. But you could be creative in finding other ways to reach people. And I think the pandemic has caused churches to take a look at that.
Yeah, I agree. Pastor Damian?
As piggybacking from what Pastor Griffith said, I think the positive thing about the pandemic, it has allowed the church to broaden its reach. Say it again, it has allowed the church to broaden its reach. So I can, 9 times out of 10, if I'm now on social media, I'm going to minister to more people that I don't see than people that I do see. Even if you take a large church like Bishop Jakes, who may have 15,000 attendance, he has 100,000 people watching him. Because once again, this thing called social media, Dr. King said about the TV and the TV camera, I'm going to use this thing to whatever. Now, social media, it now allows us to connect with people out the city, out the state, out the country. So from that perspective, that's definitely, the pandemic has definitely strengthened the church's reach and also allowed them to understand that they were reaching too short. They were reaching too short. However, I think that, let me say this, God allowed the church to be touched by the pandemic. In Genesis, the promise was to God's people that if you keep me first, if you keep your heart towards me, if you make me the priority, I'm paraphrasing, whatever comes in the land, I'll protect you from. Because of the fact the church was allowed to be touched indicates that we're probably not in the position with God that we should be. Because once again, I don't know if you remember, just in Church of God in Christ alone, how many bishops they lost in a 3-month period during the pandemic. I'm talking about crazy numbers, right? So unfortunately, I think the pandemic was supposed to get us to reconnect to what was the most important thing. To get us to really focus back on God, to really get us to really reconnect to our families, to slow things down and to get us to really, really seek God. But instead of doing that, I think we came back with a broader reach with the same mindset for the most part. A broader reach with the same tricks. And we were running to get back, but we came back doing the same thing from a broad perspective. Instead of coming back new, changed, ready to do it God's way. And that's my brief answer.
Wow. Pastor Weathers.
From my experience pastoring and moderator of our Baptist Association and interacting with various pastors with Black clergy in Philadelphia and vicinity, I would say from the pastors with whom I've spoken to, This pandemic has caused many of us to trim the fat off of our worship service. What I mean by trim the fat, what we were chewing on that we thought was meat was actually fat, you know? And so, from the past, including myself, we started to cut away that we thought was important, that we
Yeah.
realized, or that we thought was essential, really wasn't essential.
Mm-hmm.
So even reducing our worship services, not out of convenience, but just cutting away what it is that we thought was important or relevant, that when the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic hit, we found out wasn't relevant at all. So it did cause us, for a good portion of us, it did cause us to rethink and reevaluate ministry. It caused
Mm-hmm.
us to look at now, how do we use modern technology to extend the reach? It
Yeah.
caused us to get outside of the four corner, get away from the four corners of the wall and get
Mm-hmm.
outside into the community. It caused us to
Mm-hmm.
be able to evangelize in a different way. It caused us as pastors to realize that from this day forward, we'll be pastoring two congregations, one that's in person, the second that's virtual. But I have
Mm-hmm.
a concern with all of the changes that we've made, because you're absolutely right, Pastor Stewart. I have seen in a minority of situations where some ran back into the church and went right back to the same practices that that they were doing right before the pandemic, that doesn't feed the needs of the congregation or the community. But here's the
Mm-hmm.
concern that I have. Even though the pandemic has caused us to do ministry differently, some of our parishioners now went from four corners of the church into the four corners of a bedroom or the four corners of a living room.
Yeah.
So instead of extending the
Yeah.
reach and getting outside the doors to evangelize and worship, we went from one door to the other. We went
Mm-hmm.
from the church door to the home door. You
Mm-hmm.
got me? So now it's more convenient to roll out of bed, turn on Zoom or turn on, Facebook, etc., get a
Mm-hmm.
good hour, and then turn it off and then be disengaged. So we cannot allow the comfortability of the pandemic to cause us not to assemble in a manner that will glorify God, or to
Yeah.
get so comfortable that we're just satisfied with 60 minutes and no other relationship with God is necessary after the fact. And
Yeah.
so it's trying to condition our brothers and sisters to be able to understand that when David said, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord, that we cannot
Mm-hmm.
allow the culture to dictate how we worship. Think about it like this, and those in the Philadelphia area, not just outside of Philadelphia, that's just my social location right now.
Mm-hmm.
All, all the places are filling up right now. You got me? Restaurants are filling up. Basketball games are filling up right now. There was not too far from the church when the pandemic was going on, a cookie place that just opened up, and the lines was outside the door, but empty
Wow.
pews in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so, why is it that the secular world sees a need to go back to their recreational activities,
Yeah.
but we find ourselves still struggling because of the level of comfort of rolling out of bed and then rolling right back in bed when the service is over? Now,
Right.
disclaimer, and I'll close on this one. I'm not talking about those who can't make it because of medical conditions, or some who are leery because of COVID, because they've had
Mm-hmm.
COVID and they're afraid to come back in. That's going to take time. I'm talking about those who just got, how can you say, the spirit of complacency that,
Yeah.
I'm satisfied with this, and there's nothing else that I'll do.
Right. Wow. Absolutely.
Can I piggyback
Yes.
on
Go ahead.
something? And you said so much. You said so much. I think that we have to be careful as the church, as the individuals in the church, that we have to remember worship is about sacrifice, not comfort.
Hmm.
Once
Mm-hmm.
again, worship is about sacrifice, not comfort. And as Pastor
Mm-hmm.
Weathers has now said, a good portion of church goers have got comfortable now being at
Yeah.
home. And don't let your service go over, as he said, don't let their service go over 60. Because now we ought to know better, because people's attention spans can't go can't go that long. However, people
Mm-hmm.
will sit in a restaurant and wait for their table for an hour or 2 hours and
That's
have
right.
enough attention span to do that. So everybody can do everything they want to do except for come to church, right?
Yeah.
Church now is about, thank God, we don't got to do that no more. No, because watching service at home on a screen is not going to be the same thing. I don't care if you got surround sound and you got an 80-inch TV. It is not going to be the same thing as sitting in the presence of God.
Yeah.
Sitting in the
Amen.
presence of God. Because sometimes it's being in the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's it. Just being there in the presence.
Yeah.
So when the pastor asks about, are we ready for the new era? It is a
Mm-hmm.
new era. It is. And as Pastor Weather said, that once again, we have to, if you want to be progressive, you have to know we have two congregations now, those in front of us and those that are on virtual. But
Yeah.
but those that are on virtual should be only getting the benefit for those that are gathering, right? The
Mm-hmm.
virtual cannot be the primary thing, and now the actual live service, okay, becomes the second runner up, because
Mm-hmm.
that's not what it's supposed to be. So now
Right.
what we'll do to keep people on virtually, we'll make those in front of us suffer with a 60-minute service, and now we're rushing through things, and we're not even allowing God to move, and all these kind of things. So yeah, and Pastor Griffith said it, sacrifice. He pointed to sacrifice, sacrifice. It's about sacrifice.
It is.
And that's
It
what we got to
is.
let people understand. This is worse. It's not about comfort. It's about, the Bible says, forsake not the assembly, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
one another,
Right.
and bless one another, dwell together in unity. I
Unity.
can keep on, but yeah, yes.
Right. Well, we have a question here from David Marshall. What is the role of the Black church in impacting government policy regarding the homeless? Pastor Wayne Griffith, you want to tackle that?
Sure. Let me give you some of my things I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in Trenton, we had a collaboration of churches, 50 churches, and we started a economic development corporation.
Mm-hmm.
It was made up of Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal,
Mm-hmm.
and because of the homeless issue in this city, I think Sister Cindy, my battery's going dead on my iPad, so I may need to go off traveling. I'm
Yeah.
traveling. I don't know if you can hear me. Um,
Yeah.
okay. And what we were able to do is to access some governmental funding in order to build some housing
Mm-hmm.
to move people out of Section 8 housing into their own homes,
Wow.
and to build some transitional housing
Mm-hmm.
for the homeless. There were some individuals who were paying $1,400-$1,500 a month rental within Section 8 housing, and we were able to move them into their own home, getting equity, paying half that much. So it was a successful program because we were able to access some funds, some homeless money, in order to empower parishioners as related to housing. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a danger, and that is you can't sell out
Mm-hmm.
to government funding and government money. But when there are some programs that can really meet the needs of your parishioners in terms of housing, you have to have the wisdom to know how to keep that separate, and
Yeah.
also to recruit the individuals that can help you do that. So we built about 200 houses,
Wow.
and people who were homeless were able to move through some transitional housing. People who
Mm-hmm.
were in situations of rentals, no equity,
Mm-hmm.
we were able to put them into their own homes. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but it goes back to the local church being prophetic, and the local church accessing
Mm-hmm.
resources, and to use the resources of our parishioners, or the resources of other external ways to try to meet the needs of our community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's what we did. Now, there's other models. I'm sure the people have done that. But in the city of Trenton, there was a great need of, of,
Mm-hmm.
of that. We were able to meet that need by
Right.
by churches working together. And we said to our pastors, leave your ego at the door, and let's
Mm-hmm.
work together. We also have put together a banking program where we're able to select one bank, and we put our monies into that one bank.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our
Wow.
operating money, not just your Sunday school money, but your operating money. And
Mm-hmm.
we use that and leverage that to build housing for the people.
Wow.
And so we took them off the street into their own
Mm-hmm.
homes.
Wow.
And we were very successful in working together as a collaboration of churches, cross-denominational churches, to do that, to make that work.
Wow. That's amazing. Pastor Damian?
First of all, I want to applaud Pastor Griffith. Man, awesome testimony for what God now allows you to be a
Yeah.
part of to provide that housing. I mean, what you've
Mm-hmm.
done, I'm trying to do. I mean, that is a great thing. 200 homes for people. I mean, that's not a small thing. So
Mm-hmm.
if the question is, what is the role of the Black church in impacting the government policy regarding the homeless?
Right.
I would say what the Black church could do is highlight how we have money for wars, but don't have money to feed and to provide homes to people. We have money to do everything and help everybody outside of our country,
Yeah.
but not help those that are in it. And that's my biggest thing. You know, I'm not against helping people,
Mm-hmm.
but charity starts at home. And I think the Black church will have to be mobilized now and become one and come across denominations to tell the government that it's time it's time for the United States to stop worrying about what's going on outside of it and really start focusing on what's going on inside of it.
Right.
Because the resources are there, but they're
Mm-hmm.
not being now channeled to where they could be. I also think that we have to remember, in my opinion, following now the model that Pastor Griffith just said, the Black church should be getting together and kind of solving its own homeless situation in the community. If we got the 25 churches to get together and everybody just gave a seed to now, get a building to now provide, a transitional place or housing or whatever
Mm-hmm.
the case may be to help people get on their feet, where
Right.
would the community be? So I think that we can let the government know that they really should be now directing funds towards the homeless and highlighting the problem. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that we have to be part of the solution, independent of the government and not dependent upon them.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Pastor Weathers?
What is the role of the Black church in impacting government policy regarding homeless? Um, we have to be, how can I say, we have to be the prophetic voice to challenge government of their unjust practices. And let me
Mm-hmm.
explain what I mean by that. It's a sin and a shame in Philadelphia to walk down South Street and to see $500,000 to $600,000 homes being built or have already been constructed, and not just South Street, walking in Center City, but just South Street in
Mm-hmm.
particular. It's a sin and a shame to walk down South Street and see these $500,000 to $600,000 townhomes that's been rehab, constructed, etc. And right
Mm-hmm.
across the street, there's a few homeless folks sitting right there, laying right there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sin
Yeah.
and a shame to walk in certain areas where housing is like 500, 600, 700,000,
Mm-hmm.
and right across the street you
Mm.
have homelessness. It's a sin and a shame to sit up here and to provide tax abatement for those who buy these $1 million homes where they're only paying minimum property tax, while
Wow.
where that particular money in which they are being saved because they're not paying the maximum property tax
Mm.
is affecting residents that already got a 30-year mortgage, and then money is not being invested to uplift our brothers and sisters who are living in the street. It's a sin
Mm.
and a shame to have those particular policies in place where you got gentrification, where you push those who are living in impoverished communities further outside of the city. You got to be further
Mm-hmm.
Right.
outside of the city while you build up one area. Or if I can just get real, the mayor of Philadelphia, as one person said on my radio show, he has to be the mayor of the community and not the mayor of a corridor. There's no reason why
Mm-hmm.
we are the richest country, one of the richest countries, and yet we got poverty everywhere. It's a sin and a shame when I leave South Jersey, come to the Ben Franklin Bridge, come under an underpath, and a homeless person has now set up their home under there, literally have a
Yeah.
futon, have their sleeping bag out. This is under the bridge.
Under the
Under the bridge.
bridge.
That's
Right.
where they claim their residence.
Yeah.
So how can we call ourselves the richest country and yet we got poor people living in the street? I'm not against building homes or anything. All of that's
Right.
necessary. There has to be a diverse prophetic voices. One area is focused on we'll get the funding in order to build the homes. Another has to be that prophetic voice to tell the mayor and the president and the governors, etc., that it's a sin and a shame to be one of the
Right.
richest countries in the world, and yet you still got homeless people. And all of us are one paycheck from being in the street as well.
Mm,
And, and the
true.
prophetic, and Dr. Weathers, absolutely, the prophetic voice is to bring those policy makers at the table to say, we're not going to go for this.
Hmm.
And there's elections every year. And if you want our vote, and then if you want support, then you have to address the needs of our people. So instead of going and having tea with these individuals and try to look important, it's speaking truth to power to say you need to give funding to
Hmm.
meet the needs of folks so they're not sleeping under bridges. And many times
Right.
we get complacent, leadership gets complacent, and they don't challenge the political leaders to do it. Now, fortunately, in some communities, you have pastors working together, and then you can do that.
Hmm.
But you get the type of leadership that you demand. And if you don't demand good leadership in those policy areas, then they're going to basically sit on their hands and not do anything. But if you make it known to them that we're not going to sit back and let you have people dying in the
Hmm.
street, people living in the
Right.
street, people are not being needs are not being met, then that's when you have the problem.
Yeah.
And so you have to demand your rights. You have to
Hmm.
speak truth to power. So we're not gonna allow this to happen. Because
Yeah.
there's an election in certain communities, election every year.
Yeah.
They come,
Right.
October, the election in November, and
Hmm.
and 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 talk about some things, and you don't see them anymore. No,
Hmm.
you meet with them quarterly. You talk to them about what's happening and make sure they address the needs of the community.
Right.
And you're successful when you work together in doing that.
Hmm.
Can I just further add? Because I just when I chuckled, I wasn't chuckling at you. I just got hit with a couple of thoughts. This is one of my passionate areas. Two quick things. One, it's a sin and a shame, right, for politicians to sit up here and say, I'm against abortion because I'm for right to life. But then when that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for abortion, so please follow me because that's the
Right.
last thing I need to get tweeted out. He's supporting abortion. It's a sin and a shame to advocate for that fetus to be born, but then if that fetus is born into poverty, then that fetus is on its own. And when that fetus
Right.
is born
Mm.
into poverty and then find itself homeless, then here's the second point. Then it's no longer right to life. You need to pull yourself up by your own bootstrap. But if you
Mm.
never gave that person an opportunity to have a boot, how can that
Right.
person pull themselves up by their own bootstrap?
Right.
Either you're taking the boot and kicking them, right? Or you're
Hmm.
removing certain programs to ensure that that person get a bootstrap to elevate
Hmm.
herself.
Hmm. That's true.
And it's not
Wow.
That's
begging.
true.
It's like we have this religious. We use religion to our advantage to get what we want, not to be servants of God. And I see a
Hmm.
lot of politicians like, "Oh, I'm for right to life. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life." But then when that life comes into the world, when it's born into poverty, then you don't want to have anything to do with it. I think that's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. That's true. Anybody else want to add anything before we move on?
I'm ready to raise a love offering
Pastor
for Dr.
Reverend Dr.
Weathers.
Weathers is on fire. I mean, he didn't set it up. He's on fire about this right here. So he didn't set it off. I mean, honestly, he has covered, and I'm not dismissing the need for people to be responsible and
Right.
make
Right.
responsible choices. I'm not dismissing that. But I think our government has to recognize the dynamics of society have changed so much. Why are there so many people that are homeless? I'm not talking like used to be a time homeless people were like older,
Mhm.
50 or above, and what I am seeing in Center City, young
Yeah.
people in their 20s,
Yeah.
okay, of
Mm-hmm.
all colors,
Yeah.
there's a problem, whether that be raise the wage, whether that be bring down these inflated prices that, now everything is more money because of COVID. I just don't understand. I don't understand some of these dynamics. Everything is inflated because of COVID. But if the person that could barely make it before COVID, they couldn't go grocery shopping before COVID.
Yeah.
How are they going grocery shopping now with these inflated prices? How?
Right.
When the last time you went to go pick up a pack of chicken or some ribs? I put the ribs right back. I went to grab these two cases. I said, "Oh no, not today!" Because once again, the prices are just so high right now, and our government must look at that. They are supposed to be there. Just again, they're supposed to be there to look after the needs of the people, all the people, not just the upper class, all the people. And I think that they're missing the mark on just looking at our society has a problem, and because it's not going to get better ignoring it. I'm saying this again, ignoring the amount of homeless people that we have, or less fortunate. It's not going to do anything. What's going to happen is, if we think we're seeing violence now, we haven't seen anything, because people are going to become desperate. And when I got to feed my family, it makes that will make a just man do unjust things.
That's true. That's true. Well, for my last question, and this is good. That's why we're going to have some other parts. We're going to have some other parts, because this is good. After the murder of George Floyd, and we saw the demonstrations of people, blacks and whites, all across the United States, all 50 states, including, the white people, they protested as well. In the aftermath, should the voice of the church be heard? And if so, what should that look like? Let me start with Pastor Weathers.
So, wow. There's so many thoughts, and I'm trying to just summarize it real short. So, when you raise the question about, George Floyd, the demonstration across the United States, in all 50 states, in the aftermath, should the voice of the church be heard? And so, what should it look like? It's kind of interesting you would ask that question. As a moderator of the Pennsylvania Eastern Keystone Baptist Association, we had a march, and that march was protect our right to breathe, addressing the whole issue of police brutality. I stumbled across, was at a press conference, Cindy, and I didn't even know it was a press conference. So when the incident with George Floyd broke out, I got in contact with politician, make a long story short. So I was invited, President of Black Clergy and I was invited to come to a meeting on Spring Garden Street. Our president couldn't make it. Unbeknownst to me, when we went to speak before the cameras, I just thought it was going to be a highlight on the news. We were actually live. You got me? And so when they did the highlights, when I spoke, it was me and a group of other pastors and everything. What I said was highlighted. On the right side, you saw the city on fire. On the left side, you saw my voice calling for peace. We should not be a church or individuals that cover our eyes to the injustices that take place. I forgot the pastor. He's out of Princeton. I forget his name. Very phenomenal preacher and everything. When I met him briefly, we sat down and talked, and I'm only closing my eyes just to remember the conversation. He says the church has to decide whether it's going to be a relic or whether it's going to be relevant. And in the issue of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, love the fact that, Black Lives Matter was a movement that took off to address the systemic issues of police brutality, etc. But unlike the civil rights movement, it wasn't born out of the church, or wasn't birthed out of the church. Somehow we went into a malaise of a Western theology that just focused on salvation in heaven and salvation in heaven on heaven alone, and forgot that we have brothers and sisters living in hell on earth. And how do we minister to them in the midst of the Hades that they are encountering? So yes, the Black church and churches, period. Because when we say Black church, and I embrace that, but we let the evangelicals off the hook. You got me? Because just as much as they were promoting their Trumpsonian Trumpism that created more of a racial divide, they were relatively silent on this issue of George Floyd. And just as they are So, like, we have to have these Supreme Court justices that will overturn Roe versus Wade. Well, George Floyd was a fetus that was in somebody's womb that was born and then had a knee on their neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds or even longer. You got me? And so we have to decide, no, not that we don't let a culture, a religious culture that's less Christ-centered and more patriotic-centered determine how we address issues that hits the community. So yes, we have to be involved and be that prophetic voice for George Floyd. As let me run that down. Not only just George Floyd, but Trayvon Martin and Sandra Bland and Eric Gardner and Freddie Gray, and the list goes on.
Yeah. Yes. Pastor Stewart.
I think the church has to have a voice. You know, it has to have a voice in these things. When you think about George Floyd, two things come to mind: racism and police brutality. Racism and police brutality.
Right.
How could the church be silent when it comes to racism and police brutality? Racism at the systematic level and at the institutional level. I mean, racism at every level. The church should now be speaking against police brutality. You know, doing for somebody in authority to be abusing that authority against anybody. You know, against anybody, we have to now have a voice. But when it's happening towards our community in the numerous occasions, I mean, it's just so every time you turn around, there's another story. There's another killing. There's another, you're busting somebody's house and you're busting in the wrong house. There's a, you know, there's always something. Then what they do, they come and they vilify. They run real quick to cover their tracks to vilify the person. Okay, to vilify the person that they actually made the mistake with, right? And I think the church has to stand up and say, y'all, that's wrong. Admit your error. Clean up your house so far as the police are concerned. And let me just say this. I believe there are many good cops, so I'm not anti-police. Say this again. I'm not anti-police. I don't want that to be that. But we also know there are a lot of rotten apples, right? So the church's job is to put pressure. First of all, is to unite the congregants together to get, because there's strength in numbers, and then to put pressure on our local politicians. Let's start at the local level. Forget trying to reach the president. At the local level, we can put pressure on our politicians to see changes in our community. Perhaps even, you know, a community oversight board, you know, when it comes to these issues of, you know, looking at these situations that are going on. You know, I understand having, you know, your peers. How about having people in the community that now help balance the outcome of what happens to that officer, balances the outcome of the punishment that's given, you know? So that's my answer. And, you know, my good brother, Pastor Weathers, that I want to connect with after this. He was so passionate about it once again. And also Pastor Griffith, I want to connect with you too. But yeah, that's my answer.
Okay. Pastor Griffith?
Church definitely has to be involved. The church, Black church, has usually been at the vanguard of, you know, fighting against racism. Police brutality is a major problem issue. What was refreshing was to see so many young people from different ethnic groups that were marching, that were standing up. And I think people of goodwill needs to continue to work together to fight against, you know, the injustices that are in society.
Yes.
And so I was encouraged by that. But the church can provide some direction, you know, because sometimes it's not Christ-led. There's some of those movements, and the church should learn how to collaborate with other organizations, people of goodwill, and we need more of our European clergy to work together. I mean, Dr. King wrote the letter to Birmingham jail. He wrote it in response to clergymen that had criticized him from being in Birmingham, but instead of them marching with him, you know, they were criticizing him. And I think that if you are a Christian clergyman, no matter what ethnic group you are coming from, you should be concerned about injustice, against racism, and fighting to make sure. I think Dr. Cornel West said that justice is what love looks like in the marketplace. And so a church has to be
concerned about fighting against injustice and working with people of goodwill to make that happen. And so, in many movements that were successful, the young people were the ones many times were also in the street. And the elder ones gave some direction, but the young were there, always involved, and you have to keep the spirit of youth power involved and fight against injustice. And the church had to be in the foreground of that.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else have something? Okay, we've all said it all. Well, this was very good tonight. And again, we will continue on at another time. But this was very good. I enjoyed each of your answers and what you're doing and what you have done and what you see is vital and it's very important. And I want to thank all of you that are watching, those on my YouTube channel, as well as those that will watch the replay later on for weeks, days, and months ahead that will watch. And I want to thank everyone and our panelists tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us.
It's great meeting everybody.
And it won't be your last time.
I appreciate that. My brothers, listen to me. I'm contacting y'all. You know, don't be ignoring my don't ignore my friend request. Don't know my friend request.
All right.
Definitely.
That sounds good.
It's very good. Very, very good.
We're gonna keep in touch.
I want you brothers to stay there.
Sure.
But I want to thank all of you again for being a part, and we will be back again on Real Talk with Cindy. So stay tuned for our announcements and flyers that you will see. And I want everyone to have a blessed week and continue to carry on. And thank God for all of you. And we will see you real soon again. God bless you.
Thank you so very much for tuning in to Real Talk with Cindy Barber. We hope you have been informed and inspired by the conversation on this evening. You can contact Cindy Barber on Instagram at CindyRBarber04. You can email her at ms.cindybarber@gmail.com or the YouTube channel at Cindy R. Barber. You can also contact Cindy about having your event advertised on Real Talk with Cindy Barber. Cindy looks forward to you joining her next week for another informative conversation right here on Real Talk with Cindy Barber. Until then, have a great evening.